he kept a box of Kleenex in his studio because he was so tough and so mean, and all the people came out crying and all this stuff. So I was just expecting, God.
Today, we've got a long overdue guest on the podcast, somebody that I've known for years and years. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and today we are talking with Jennifer Downing Olsson. And I first met Jennifer back in Chicago in the early 2000s. We get into all of that in the podcast, but she has had such a cool career moving forward, and is playing in the Swedish Radio Symphony Orchestra, used to be a member of the Gothenburg Symphony. She also comes back to the United States each summer to play in the Grant Park Music Festival. And so we dig into all sorts of topics, in addition to her path, like the experiences of an American going to Sweden, similarities and differences, what might be surprising on either side of the pond. So many great things. It's just really a pleasure to sit down with Jennifer. We met up in Chicago live. I went to see a Grant Park Symphony concert and then chatted for a while for the podcast. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, A440, based right there in Chicago, by the way, D'Addario Strings, Robertson & Sons, and Upton Bass. More on them in a bit, but let's dig into this conversation with Jennifer Downing Olsson. So we met, you were in Chicago in the Civic Orchestra in like early 2000s, right?
2000 to 2002.
Okay. And so we met in Chicago, but then also we did Spoleto USA in Charleston, South Carolina, like 2002, maybe?
I think we did it 2 summers together,
maybe.
Didn't we?
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's like, I don't even know how many years ago, 16 years ago.
Okay. Too many.
And then you've moved on to all sorts of different moving overseas to Europe, playing in Sweden, right, under Gustavo Dudamel, super famous conductor, and now in the Swedish Radio Symphony Orchestra.
That's right.
And Jennifer and I are talking backstage in Chicago at the Grant Park Music Festival in the bass room. And so, can you just sort of take us on that journey? Now, you grew up in, if I remember right, Florida?
In South Florida.
Okay,
That's
so
right.
You grew up in South Florida. How'd you get into music?
Wow, I have to thank my high school orchestra teacher, Mr. Simmons, who went above and beyond. I started playing the bass in middle school. I was going to play the violin. All my other friends wanted to play the violin, but the teacher was like, "You're tall, you're going to play the bass." The typical story for lots of people, probably. So I played the bass, thought it was really fun, but I didn't really get serious about it until high school. Wendell Simmons was the name of the high school orchestra teacher, and he started a chamber orchestra on the side, and his wife played in the Florida Philharmonic, and he just did so much for us. And there are a couple of his students that have gone on to be professional musicians and teachers and educators. Lori Price, do you know her? Lori Law?
I know her well. Wait a minute. She also independently, so Jennifer and I were talking before we hit the mic, like several people have recommended that we chat, although we know each other anyway, so we should be chatting anyway, but Lori also independently reached out and said, you two should chat. So I know Lori really well. She and I went to Northwestern together.
That's right. That was the connection.
Yeah, and she teaches, I think, middle school orchestra in the west suburbs here in Chicago.
Yeah, Naperville, yeah.
Wow.
So she and I were in high school together, and we played in this little chamber orchestra, and he introduced me to my bass teacher in high school, Brian Meyer, who also led me on the right path. I ended up going to Interlochen one summer, and that's where I met Mr. Hurst, Larry Hurst, and he recruited me to IU. Geez, where does this story take me? 4 years at IU, then on to Civic. That's where we met. Then I went to New World for a year. And long story short, I had met my husband, who's Swedish, in Civic, Jimmy.
Right.
And so we did a long distance relationship the 1 year that I was in New World, and I was sort of faced with a big decision, like stay for 4 years at New World, this amazing place, or are we going to really make this work? So I ended up taking an audition in Sweden And long story short, I moved there.
And that was the Gothenburg Symphony?
That was actually an audition for the Swedish Radio Orchestra, if you can believe it, the one that I'm in now.
Okay.
But it was a 1-year position.
Okay.
And within a couple weeks, there was an audition in the Gothenburg Symphony, also for a 1-year position. And Charlie Doremus and I sort of won both of those auditions. We both won both. So we split those contracts for the 1 year. Okay. And then I ended up getting a job in Gothenburg a couple years later. Okay.
So I've chatted with Mr. Hurst, Larry Hurst, for the podcast, but I also love to ask just like people who've studied with him. So tell me, what was he like as a teacher? Like anything?
He was the best. I feel like I got such a good education with him. So warm and just, such a nice guy.
Yeah.
The lessons with him just felt like I was getting all that I needed to know, like he knew everything I needed to know. Playing through the excerpts and his huge metronome that he had on his piano. And he just had so many students that made it.
Yeah.
So that was really inspiring.
I remember him talking to students. He's like, you play something well. And he's like, sounds good. What else you got? I don't know if you heard that line. Okay.
I don't remember that. But yeah, he was great. And then also my time at IU, I was lucky enough to have one semester with Murray Grodner.
Well, okay. So tell me. So I chatted with Caitlin Kaminga, who teaches bass in Trinidad and Tobago now, but she was in Louisiana Philharmonic. She was in a bunch of different orchestras, and she was in this weird overlap where she studied with Murray Grodner, Larry Hurst, and Bruce Bransby, right? Okay, so you had a bit of time with Murray Grodner.
We did, and at the time, I remember thinking, "Geez, I came here to study with Mr. Hurst, and he's not going to be my teacher. Like, what's going on?" He was going to be dean, acting dean, or something like that. But it was like a blessing because Murray Grodner and I had heard stories about him that he kept a box of Kleenex in his studio because he was so tough and so mean, and all the people came out crying and all this stuff. So I was just expecting, God, oh. But he and I we really hit it off. Okay. So that was a great semester.
Cool. So I'm always fascinated talking to people who've been working in Europe for a while. And then you've had this experience where for how many years have you been in the Grant Park Symphony now? Quite a few.
Oh, geez. I tried to count the other day. I think it's like 12.
Okay. So you've been 12 years bouncing back, maybe with a season or two off from the Grant Park Symphony, but primarily bouncing back and forth between Europe and the U.S. Things I think about a lot and people think about a lot. So maybe just that experience of going to Sweden, starting to work in Sweden. Talk about that experience being an American from South Florida, U.S. citizen, going to Sweden. What was that like?
Oh, wow. When I first moved there, I remember thinking, wow, this is life as I know it. Like, it really wasn't that different, both just being an American in Sweden, but also working as an American bass player in the orchestra. But then the longer you're there, the more differences you start to notice just in the culture and things like that. Not so much in the orchestra, but just broadly in the culture. Yeah,
I'm from South Dakota, and we have this sort of comedy of the Swedes hate the Norwegians, and so they're all in South Dakota. So like I don't really know what that means, or just like what's Sweden like? What's it like living in Sweden?
Sweden is.
That's okay. I know. That's a very extraordinarily broad question. So sorry.
Well, coming from Florida, I guess the first thing I noticed was how cold it was.
Okay,
and even more than cold was how dark it was. The winters are incredibly long. If the sun comes out at all, it comes out from 9 a.m. to 2:30 in the afternoon. So that was a big shock for me. People are much more reserved, I guess I would say. Walking down the street, you don't just say hi to someone that you don't know. I had this good example that I came up with. Imagine that you're in an elevator and you're standing in the elevator with an American that you don't know. If you don't say, it's just natural to say, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
Or good morning.
Yeah.
Or how you doing? And if you didn't say that, it would be awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're standing in the elevator with a Swede, you just stand there and you don't say anything.
Okay.
And it would be very awkward if someone turned to you and say, hey, how you doing?
Okay, interesting.
So you don't really talk to people that you don't know. But on the other hand, once you get to know people, they're so warm and generous. And I mean, it's a really great place to live, great place to raise a family, and a great place to be an orchestra musician. So
the life as an orchestra musician in Sweden. So what's that like?
Life is great.
Okay.
It's a really nice rehearsal schedule. We have lots of rehearsals, lots of time to go into the music. We could talk about actually.
Yeah.
Just lots of time. And then on the other hand, you have so much vacation time. When you want to start a family, the maternity leave is just incredible. I mean, you can stay home with your kids for almost 2 years. So it's just the quality of life is really great.
So in terms of rehearsals and digging into the music, so like what's a typical concert cycle look like?
Yeah, so we start on Monday, and a typical day is 10 a.m. to 2:15, sometimes 3:15, with a couple breaks in there. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is usually the dress rehearsal. And we have concerts Thursday night, Friday night, and sometimes Saturday afternoon. So you always have Friday during the day off to sort of recollect yourself, prepare for next week's show. And then Sundays are always off.
Okay.
But I mean, you're rehearsing, that's 3 full days of rehearsal time. Whereas if I compare it to something like Grant Park, which is just the opposite. I mean, the pace is so fast.
Talk about the pace in Grant Park, because that is a very, very big contrast, and I've played a bit here, so I'm familiar. But what's that schedule like?
That schedule is we start on a Tuesday, and you'll have a 2.5 hour rehearsal for the first program of the week. Later in the day, you'll have a 2.5 hour rehearsal for the next program of the week, and so then that's Tuesday, and already by Wednesday is the concert for that program that you rehearsed for 2 hours on Tuesday. And then Thursday, Friday, you have rehearsals for the Friday and Saturday show. So, I mean, it's so fast paced, but God, the orchestra is just, I joke and say it's like jumping into a sports car. I mean, it's just, everyone's prepared. Everyone's ready to go. It's fun.
But a different, it's a little more speed reading.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have learned to speed read, that's for sure. And then, so to compare it to Sweden, the positive side of a rehearsal schedule in Sweden is that you just have time. I mean, we have a bass sectional every week.
We have a bass sectional
every hour of bass sectional.
When does that happen in the week?
It happens on the Tuesday.
Okay.
So we've had a full day of rehearsal on Monday with the orchestra. And then Tuesday morning, we start with the bass sectional. And that just does so much for the group. I mean, we have time to talk about how are we going to play that sforzando, or, we're going to play that on the string or off the string, or work on intonation stuff. And it just does so much to have the time to do that. And then when you go on stage later, it's suddenly a whole new world,
So, and the principal bass is leading that? Is that how that works?
Is leading that.
I mean, it makes sense, because if we think about any sort of educational setting, that's what you do all the time. But I have never in my adult life done that in a professional group.
I don't think people have time to do it here.
Yeah.
I just feel like having that much rehearsal time just really gives the orchestra a chance to know each other. And it's almost, I mean, especially at this orchestra I'm playing in Stockholm now, it's just like a big chamber orchestra. Everyone's looking around at each other. You have time to listen. Oh, what's the second clarinet doing? Or what's the, trombone section doing there? It's just.
This episode is brought to you by the good folks at Upton Bass String Instrument Company. Eric and Gary and the whole Upton team, I can't say enough good things about them. And they have been on board with the various endeavors I've done online from the start. They were one of the early sponsors of the blog back in 2006 and 2007. And it has been so fun to follow along with their journey and see them develop these new models of basses like the car bass, the Bostonian, the Bohemian, and to connect with all these amazing players. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many people that play Upton basses, from Eric Rivas of Branford Marsalis' band and Lucia Torino of The Devil Makes Three, all the way over to Anthony Monzo of the New Century Chamber Orchestra, and Kevin Smith, Willie Nelson's bass player. I've had many students purchase Upton basses over the years. I've had a lot of colleagues play Upton basses. I see them on gigs all the time. They play great, and Upton stands behind their work. Can't recommend them highly enough. Check them out online at uptonbass.com. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Here's a great tip. Change your strings 2 at a time, removing them from the inside out, then replacing them from the outside in allows for easy access to the lower pegs, ensuring strings lay neatly in the peg box. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Well, let me throw another massive question your way. So apologies in advance, but what's the state of classical music like in Sweden, in Stockholm or Gothenburg or anywhere? Is that a big part of the culture? Is that, how does that, and then maybe how does that contrast with what you've seen in the States, Florida or Chicago or wherever?
Well, Swedish orchestras are subsidized by the government. So we're not dependent on sponsors or corporate events or anything like that, or endowments.
Endowment, yeah, right. The thing we don't want to spend down. Yeah, right, yeah.
So you feel like your job is pretty secure. I mean, talking to a lot of the musicians here, even just in Chicago, they don't know. They don't know what the future is like for a lot of the orchestras here. I can't imagine what that's like day to day. So I feel incredibly lucky to have secure position in an orchestra. Stockholm is about 1 million people that live in Stockholm.
Okay.
I know there's the same amount of people that live in Chicago that live in the entire country of Sweden, but
really
about 9 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in Stockholm, a little over 1 million, and they have 3 full-time orchestras. They have 2 symphony orchestras and an opera orchestra. So, I mean, that says a lot right there. And they all fill concert houses.
So I got to ask about that daylight thing, though. So my wife, she, and here we're in Chicago, she would do that, but she had one of those lamps that would, give you the happy light because it would be so dark all the time. How do you deal with that? Does that get you down, or does that get people down, or is there a general malaise those dark months of the year?
I think a lot of people suffer from it. That's one of those things, like I talked about before. The differences I noticed the longer I lived there. The first couple of years, it didn't bother me as much, but by the 4th year or so, you know what's coming. You know that November is just getting darker and darker by the minute. And this orchestra in Stockholm, where I work now, it's the radio orchestra. So the concert hall is basically a big studio, big recording studio. So it's kind of like a bunker, like underground. And so when you go into rehearsal at 9 a.m, dark. Come out of rehearsal at 3 p.m, it's dark. You've missed your year. All the sunlight.
Oh, wow.
But something that helps, and I have to thank my kids for this, is just getting outside. No matter what the weather, even if it's dark outside, just get out there. You go play in the snow. You take a walk. Coming from Florida, those first winters, it would get dark, and I felt like I should just put my pajamas on and go to bed.
Right.
But it's 4 p.m. So just get outside. The fresh air really helps.
So this extremely well-known conductor in Gothenburg, who I was in Gothenburg before LA Phil, right? Is that the right progression? So Gustavo Dudamel. What was it like working with him on a regular basis?
That was such a magical time. I don't even think we realized really what he was and how special. I mean, of course, really special he was, but looking back on that time, it was just really magical. And all I can say is he's the real deal. I mean, some of my most memorable concerts are with him, and he walks into the room, star power, charisma, or whatever you want to call it, and it's on the podium as well.
And it's always interesting to me, the effect that conductor, that person up there can have on the either orchestra morale or the inspiration of the orchestra or something like that. And I've always wondered, like, what are those qualities? Can you quantify those qualities? Like, what is it about somebody like Gustavo? Like, what makes him? Because I mean, you watch him on video. Anybody who hasn't seen him do the Marquez Danzón or any other numerous piece, I mean, he's got that special something. I think a lot about what that is. I'm not sure what that is.
I don't know if I can say what it is either. I mean, his body language is inspiring. What he says about the music. I don't know either. I mean, I can share a story about Daniel Harding, who's the music director in the Swedish Radio Orchestra. Now, he doesn't have the star power. He's not as big of a celebrity maybe as Gustavo Dudamel, but the relationship he has with the orchestra is a whole nother kind of magic. I mean, he listens to the orchestra and the orchestra listens to him. And by, we start on Monday and when we play the concert on Thursday, something has happened. I mean, it's different than it was on Monday. And I think, I don't know, that's all you can ask for. Do something with the music. Make it special. That's why we play live music.
Is there a difference between you played the two orchestras in Sweden in a bass section in Sweden versus a bass section in the U.S.? Are there any different traits of the way people follow the principle or like play a pizzicato even or use vibrato or anything like that? Are there any sort of commonalities you suss out? You're in a Swedish orchestra, in an American orchestra, anything you notice?
I don't know if I could make a generalization from Swedish to American, because even the two Swedish orchestras I played with were so different.
Really? So how are they different?
I think every bass section is made up of 7, 8, 9 individuals, and you sort of create the reality. Those 8 players, what that bass section is like. And of course, there's traditions that have been passed down. That was one fun thing about Gothenburg was the tradition. Played a whole lot of Sibelius with Nemi Järvi. He was music there for 25 years. Did a bunch of. And the word is that, I mean, things were passed down from Sibelius himself.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, cool.
So, I mean, tradition is alive in the bass section, and they play that way because of those traditions. And I don't want to make that kind of generalization. American, because Grant Park Orchestra, I mean, come together for 10 weeks. All these players are playing in other year, and I don't know. It works.
Each is onto itself.
Yeah.
But yeah. I remember visiting Helsinki, and everything was Jan Sibelius Academy, Sibelius XYZ, and just remembering that really struck me, the impact that he had.
Well, it's something special to play Sibelius, and for sure. And I can imagine playing it in Finland more unique, but Swedish orchestras have a definite way of playing it. When
you come back, so, and this could be music related or totally non-music related, like what you keep coming back to the U.S. for these periods of time, the summer or whenever. What's one of the things you notice when you come back to the U.S.? Is there something? Because I mean, I remember I would go to Germany or something. The first thing I would notice, like, where's the ice in my Coke? Something stupid like that. Is there anything you notice coming back to America that it's like, oh yeah, here we are back in America?
Oh yeah, ice in the Coke.
Okay.
Just so much trash, like all these to go, when people are getting their coffee to go, their lunch to go, their burritos to go. There's just so much garbage that you throw away, because you don't really do that in Sweden. You don't take food to go.
Yeah.
If you're going to go out to eat, sit there and enjoy it.
Right. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm not a to-go guy. So.
No. You should try it out.
So speaking of Sweden, and then you've taken auditions in the States, you've taken auditions in Sweden. Talk me through what an audition in Sweden is like and how it might differ from a United States audition.
So your typical audition in Sweden is much more solo based than orchestral excerpt based. You'll definitely have to play the Dittersdorf concerto.
So do you know why that has become the standard in the way it has in Europe?
I don't know, but you got to play it on every audition. Okay. And then you're going to play the entire first movement with the cadenza, the Gruber cadenza.
The Gruber cadenza, okay.
You're going to play the second movement, possibly with cadenza. Third movement, never.
But first and second movement with cadenza.
Second movement, probably the first thing that you're going to play with piano before you even touch an excerpt. That's what
in solo tuning?
When I first moved there were some auditions still in solo tuning, but nowadays it's orchestral tuning.
Now it's orchestral tuning. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe Charlie and I had something to do with that. Who knows? Maybe. But yeah, so you play the Dittersdorf and then you play one or two excerpts.
Okay.
And another big difference is you're just working on a much smaller scale. You know, maximum 30, 40 people are going to show up for an audition. Compared to today, over 100.
It could be a lot. Yeah.
So it's still really hard to get through that first round.
So your first round would be first and second movement of Dittersdorf?
Most likely.
Okay, so that's some time.
That's a mini recital.
That's a remarkably longer time than many because I can't tell you it's like I played Beethoven 9 recits. I played like a couple excerpts and thank you. So I was up there for like 6 minutes max, Okay. Interesting.
But it's nice because Sweden, let's face it, it's pretty far away. Most everywhere. So
right.
People
so they're
make
going to listen.
Long trips to come there, and they really give you a chance.
Okay.
So then if you make it through to the second round, you're definitely going to play Bottini. Probably the whole first movement, cadenza, piano. You may get a chance to rehearse with the pianist before. You may not. Play more excerpts, and then the finals when they break out all the excerpts.
Okay.
Which I feel like is the opposite of here, right? I haven't taken American.
It's kind of is the opposite, isn't it? Yeah. Interesting. What are some of your go-to Swedish excerpts? Is it the same that we always?
It's pretty much the same.
Okay.
Another one that they love in Sweden is the Nielsen flute.
Oh dear, yeah. Those Nielsen pieces
they're very
tricky.
difficult.
Oh,
that's definitely.
Okay.
But otherwise.
This episode is brought to you by Robertson & Sons Violins. For more than 40 years, over 4 decades, Robertson & Sons has specialized in providing the highest quality string instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages. Their modern facility, which is totally beautiful, by the way, if you're ever able to make it out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I highly recommend it. They have a recital hall that they use not only for performances, but it's available to their clients. So if you want to try out a fine pedigree bass or even a student bass or anything in between, you can go in that recital hall. I've had the chance to do that. Totally amazing. I'm like a kid in the candy store when I'm down there at Robertson's. Check them out online at robertsonsviolins.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Whenever anybody's going to the Midwest, and I lived in Chicago, Illinois for years and years, I tell them to go to A440. If they're looking for a bow, if they're looking for a bass, if they need some repairs done, if they have a student who's looking for an instrument, A440 has been serving the community for years and years. They're located just west of Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago. They do great work, and they've been a big supporter of bass events over the years, whether it's the Chicago Bass Festival or really any bass event. A440, you guys rock. Check them out at a440violinshop.com. How close would 18-year-old Jennifer have expected this path?
No, definitely not.
No. What aspect would have been surprising to her?
I'm very close with my family, so I never expected that I would be so far away from my family.
Yeah.
So that's been hard, but that's one thing that's so nice about Grant Park.
It's probably,
And I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's difficult to move my whole family from Sweden to Chicago every summer.
You think? Yeah.
But it's worth it, not only because it's an amazing orchestra and the bass section is awesome, but also because I get to come back to the U.S. and spend 10 weeks, and my family comes to visit me here, and my kids get to experience American life more than just a week or two. And
when did you got the job a year ago?
Yes.
Swedish?
I won the audition last September, which was 1 month before my 40th birthday, which I'm very proud of.
So what inspired you, or what made you decide to?
Yeah, so I've been working in Gothenburg for almost 10 years, and we just felt like it wasn't quite right for the family. And my husband was offered a job in Stockholm and commuted for a year and just loved it and suggested that maybe we should look to move to Stockholm. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to win an audition. I'm almost 40, like I said. Yeah. But I got myself out there again, and I started auditioning. I took my first one and got through the first round, which was a big step. And I still remember that first audition I took, after being in Gothenburg for 10 years. And I didn't tell anyone I was going. I sort of hid in the corner and didn't want anyone to see me there. And then I advanced and I just sort of jumped out like, hey guys, how's it going?
Really?
That was a big moment, just to feel like, oh, okay, I still have something to offer, after sitting in an orchestra for 10 years.
Was it challenging to get back in that audition mode? Of course
it was challenging. I mean, I was working full time. Yeah. I married. I have 2 kids.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a whole different ball game. I had to become really efficient with my practicing, and yeah, that's very different.
Well, that's a question I've had people ask me to ask people a lot. Is like, when there's the winning of a job when you're in an academic setting or whatever, you're in school or maybe settings like that, and then there's the I am working full time or I'm working full time with a family and taking an audition. That's a whole different ball of wax. Mm-hmm. So like, how did you get that time in there on the bass?
I mean, geez, I tried to keep my life as normal as possible. Even the week of the audition, I worked in the orchestra. I went to rehearsals. I played the concert. I just wanted to keep everything as normal as possible. I'd try to stay after concerts and practice because my kids were already asleep anyway. I'd get some hours in there. My husband took a bunch of the load at home to prepare for this thing. And, but I mean, I'm talking, a couple weeks before. It's not like I could prepare 6 months or anything like that. But maybe that's something that you have going for you, being a professional for so many years. Because I feel like experience is not something you can show in an audition. They want flash. They want to be impressed in an audition. Mm-hmm. An experience show when you're actually sitting in the orchestra. Yeah. But maybe it helped me practice. Half the work was already done.
Yeah. Kevin Brown, who's the principal bass of the Detroit Symphony, was talking about just how different he found the experience of actually being in an orchestra, playing the standard rep at tempo with a professional orchestra, and just like what an effect that has, because as a student, you spend so much time building things in slow motion, and that experience, like you're talking about, like that has to have an effect on your the way that you're preparing, certainly the way you're executing things. And even if it doesn't all come through in the audition, it's got to affect the experience of preparation.
Yeah. And I think, you were asking about differences before with Swedish. That experience maybe gets me farther in a Swedish audition than it would in an American audition, because, everything here is so perfection based. Mm-hmm. You rip out your excerpt, like machine gun. Heldenleben, you know all the numbers, and you're playing the licks and all that kind of stuff. And whereas in Sweden, maybe they're not necessarily looking for the perfection of all the notes, for the whole picture. They want to hear that what's going on. Mm-hmm. Not to say that they don't want to hear that in the U.S. too, but
right.
But people,
I think that's the trend, though. What you're describing, yeah, that's a tendency. Yeah, totally.
So, yeah.
So if somebody, and this might be a really hard thing to answer, but if somebody listening to this, that let's say they're in the States and they want to explore playing in Europe, like how on earth do you even find out what job there is? How do you audition? Can you audition? Can you get a job? Do you need a green card? I'm sure it's got to be different for different countries, but like broadly speaking, do you have any advice for someone who might want to explore that path?
This website called Musical Chairs. Mm-hmm. All the auditions are on there. I think it's different from country to country. I know Sweden, if you win an audition, they will help you get the work permit, move over there. Yeah, and if you're a bass player, start practicing Dittersdorf.
Okay. What are they looking for in Dittersdorf? Like, how do I make my Dittersdorf, or how does someone listening make their Dittersdorf, like, audition winnable? I've just never spent a lot of time on that piece. I mean, I played it with my high school orchestra, my youth orchestra, so I played the piece, but, like, what makes it for a good Dittersdorf? You've listened to Dittersdorf plenty, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like, what impresses you, or what should people be thinking about? You know, going back to Larry Hurst, talking about him. I remember him. I don't know if he ever did this with you, but he would sometimes in some masterclass say, like, just imagine a great cellist playing this, and someone would, and you played so much better, and he'd be like, and that in some ways is such. It feels like a diss on bass. It's like, oh, you mean good?
Yeah,
but that's actually a really, you know, like, and I've used that on students too. Play it like such and such, and all of a sudden they sort of. You know,
and I have a funny story about Dittersdorf because I was in New World when I was preparing for my first ever Swedish audition. So I was trying to play the Dittersdorf for everybody because I didn't know anything about it at the time either. And I played it in a master class from Michael Tilson Thomas, who's the director at New World and the conductor at New World. And I start the cadenza, and the Gruber cadenza, it's very long and small segments, you know, so you play the first part, breath, the next part, breath. After like the third or fourth, he's like, wow, this should be on the Gong Show. So I have to this day written on my Gruber cadenza Gong Show just to like.
Now we know what Michael Tilson Thomas thinks.
You can't bring me down. He loves that Gruber cadenza.
That's hilarious. I remember doing the Pacific Music Festival years ago and being backstage and listening to the Bottesini Grand Duetto No. 2 with the conductor for Pacific Music Festival. And Sue Wolf was playing. It would play it fabulously, wonderful. But it's really long, that first movement. And they're going through it. And the conductor, he's like, how long is this? It was like 15 minutes. He's 15 minutes for the whole piece. No, 15 minutes for the first movement.
Exactly.
Like, what? So... Yeah. So you probably didn't picture this exact path, you know, like 18-year-old Jennifer, but if you could go back and talk to 18-year-old Jennifer, and give her some advice, bass, music, or otherwise, what might you tell her?
Well, I know you asked. I
have recently been, although I realized I didn't always ask that. It's only been the last couple years, but okay. So what might you say?
Well, I'll try to get through without getting emotional, like in one of those talk shows. I mean, besides the obvious, you'll never have more time than you had then, kind of thing, you know, just have time to practice, which mom and full-time musician, you don't have that time. So practice as much as you can. But another thing I thought of was I always had a problem with confidence. I mean, even looking back to my time at IU, you know, I was never the one that signed up for master class, you know, to play for people. I was always the one that sort of hid in my practice room off in the corner so no one would hear me practicing. And I mean, I was in school with some great bass players who have great jobs today, like Sarah Hogan and Paul Dinola, and I mean, Ru Fong Liu. I mean, these great players around me, and I just never felt like I cut it, like I was good enough, you know? And then when I was getting ready to graduate, I had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, I had Murray Grodner's words in my head, like he really believed in me, but I was just like, what am I going to do? And then, you know, Civic calls at the last minute. And then 2 years at Civic, I didn't know what I was going to do. And then New World called it. And I mean, all these little successes that I had, it just didn't register. And even, you know, winning a job in Sweden and like playing Grant Park, and God, I should have realized that I could do it, you know, but I never could really believe that I was good enough somehow. I wish I could go back and have a little more confidence and sign up for that master class or play for my friends, or I don't know. Yeah. Believe in myself a little more.
I think it's something we all struggle with.
Yeah.
I've asked myself that same questions, like when am I going to like get my act together and actually like,
realize that you can play the bass. I mean,
yeah. Right.
When you called me to do this podcast, I'm like, who cares what I have to say about the bass?
I think it's clear that you can play the bass.
Oh, well, thanks, Jason. I know you can play the bass too.
No. Thanks for chatting.
Here.
And I was trying to think of the last time we saw each other in person.
I know.
It's been a little while.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Great to catch up with you in person. It's the way I love to do these. I wish I could do all these episodes in person, but you're just up to so many cool things. And so thank you for chatting, and thank you for listening to this. Maybe it's your first episode. Maybe you've been with us for a while. Regardless, thank you for following along. And if you want to do something to help the podcast, the one thing you can do, the number one thing, is share this out. You can find this in whatever app you're listening to this with. You're probably listening on a smartphone, or by going to our website at contrabassconversations.com. You can find this episode right there on the homepage and share it out to wherever you hang out online, Facebook, Instagram, share it to your story, Twitter, what have you. That would be wonderful. And while you're there, sign up for our email list, and we'll let you know when episodes like this come out. We put out a couple a week these days, and we're chatting with people from all across the globe with all sorts of interesting careers like Jennifer's. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Mike Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. If you're looking for a bass, Mitch is making beautiful instruments and repairing basses and all sorts of good stuff like that near Dallas. Look him up at mitchmooring.com. Thank you to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging all the topics that we talk about. It's so helpful moving forward as we do best of episodes and thematic episodes and all that kind of good stuff. I'm your host, Jason Heath, here in San Francisco, California, the chilliest town in the continental U.S. in the summer, but I love it anyway. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.